Today, I'm very happy to be interviewing Mr. Gary Stanley, who has recently joined the advisory board of Canada's First Phosphate, which I believe is Canada's today premier entry into the lithium iron phosphate cathode raw material supply business. In any case, and congratulations on that. But what's more important is your background. And can you tell us? I understand you were with the United States Department of Commerce for a career, 40 years.
That's right.
And can you tell me what was your final title there?
So, by the way, it's a real honor and a real pleasure to be able to speak with you today, and very grateful for this opportunity to speak with you. Very brief introduction that could obviously go into greater detail, but I joined the U.S. Department of Commerce in 1983 after graduating from North Carolina State University with a degree in chemical engineering and wood and paper science and technology. So I came in as a forest products person directly from college and my work experience. But as is oftentimes the case with working with the U.S. government, there was a growth in both responsibilities and sectoral duties while I was with Commerce. And my final position at the U.S. Department of Commerce had a historical connection in that for the first time in the agency's more than 120 years of existence, that the Biden administration had stood up an Office of Critical Minerals and Metals. And so it was my great honor and my great privilege to occupy that particular position for the first time in the history of the U.S. Department of Commerce.
I would like to ask you a question about something that I don't understand.
Sure.
We keep talking about the Department of Defense, Department of Energy. I understand the Department of Defense and critical materials for war fighting in particular. I understand Department of Energy, which the public isn't aware of the involvement of energy in material science. It is the largest employer of PhDs in the world. And so people don't realize that. But what surprised me was that the Department of Commerce had published this document that you edited, and that. So now that I've got you, the fellow who actually did it, can you please tell us why the Department of Commerce was so central in the development of a critical mineral policy for the United States government?
That is an excellent question, and one that I've been asked previously. And I will say quite honestly that I thought that the move initially was one of a great surprise, because Commerce, as you just laid out, clearly does not have either the resources or the equities that, say, a Department of Defense or Department of Energy, and frankly, a Department of Interior, through either its Bureau of Land Management, for permitting authorities for mining, or the U.S. Geological Survey, which of course is the data and analytical arm for the critical minerals and mining sector for the United States government. But the decision was made by the previous administration that Commerce brought a position where Commerce could be the, if you will, the independent broker of a interagency agreement. But Commerce brought two things to the table that frankly neither one of those other agencies could bring to the table. And that was a mandate, number one, to work internationally. So I worked in the International Trade Administration for the U.S. Department of Commerce. Our mandate is to work internationally, to work cooperatively with governments and with industries in terms of competitiveness, industry, supply chain resiliency, and so forth. Number one. But the second thing that we also have is a mandate to work directly with industry. So frankly, the other agencies work with industries, but in a completely different context. And so the decision was made that Commerce brings a mandate to work in those two realms directly with industry and directly in the international area. And quite frankly, when you look at the components of that strategy, which has become the model for a lot of other governments as well, is that the theory of the case, as we call it, is where you need three elements to be successful in the supply chain resiliency conversation. One is domestic capabilities, domestic processing. Secondly is trade with allies and partners. And number three is promoting investment. And Commerce has congressionally mandated authorities in each one of those three, as we call them, buckets of the theory of the case. And so, quite frankly, we brought an independent voice to the conversation that wouldn't be biased toward either the defense industrial base or to just energy technologies, or frankly, even in the analysis and research associated with critical minerals. And then all of a sudden, when the release of that strategy came in 2019, Commerce found itself really at the heart and center of the conversation on critical minerals. It was a fascinating historical development.
Yeah, I really was unaware of that. And to me, I kept hearing at conferences that somebody from the Department of Commerce was there, and I was wondering why. Okay, now I understand. That's very, very interesting.
Yes.
Now, did the COVID situation slow down this process?
Yes, unfortunately, it did across the two most important landscapes, one domestically and one internationally. The one internationally, especially, we had literally just begun the international work in the field of critical minerals cooperation. Not surprisingly, Canada was the first U.S. government that the United States entered into a critical minerals working group. And that had basically taken place at the end of 2019. Soon after that, we had a similar development with Australia. The United States was looking at ways to further advance key critical international partnerships in the area of critical minerals. And just to be very candid, we not only did it cease those other international outreach opportunities, but it literally took the wind out of the sail in both our Canadian and Australian working relationships. So it was devastating from that stage because we were literally just at the cusp of getting started. But to be even more direct, the COVID situation essentially unveiled, or if you will, shed light on an issue that I think many in the critical minerals and manufacturing area have known for years, is that supply chains are insanely vulnerable. They are not resilient, and quite frankly, they can be disrupted by so many external forces that have nothing to do with the actual critical minerals themselves. And so COVID showed the vulnerabilities and showed the lack of resilience and, quite frankly, the lack of stability in those critical mineral markets, not only in the United States, but in Canada and a lot of other trading partners as well.
My colleague Christopher Eccleston in the UK has recently written about Chinese problems with critical minerals, and he said, we are so focused on our own problems, we don't realize the Chinese are also dependent on the West for a number of things.
That's true.
I guess my question to you is, where do we go from here? Because, we all say the old shibboleth that understanding a problem is halfway to solving it. I think that understanding a problem is about 1% of the way to solving it. And so, what, in fact, is the U.S. government going to do to strengthen supply chains of critical minerals? That's a simple sounding question, but it's the key question for government involvement.
It is. And this is where the concept of a holistic vantage point, where when I was the shepherd for the 2019 critical mineral strategy, you go back and you look at that particular paper or the report, if you will, and it basically laid out the realities that this is not an issue that can simply be solved by either trade or by domestic capabilities. This is something that has to be done from a very holistic standpoint. It must include everything from mining through processing, through end product, and through recycling. It's the only way to make a healthy, resilient, reliable supply chain going forward. I think the last two administrations that I worked for at the U.S. government, at the U.S. Department of Commerce, both the Trump and the Biden administrations are to be lauded for a clear understanding that, number one, it took 50 plus years to get into this situation. We will not solve this. We don't have 50 years to solve this. Things have to be pushed forward. Things have to be done coherently. They have to be collectively, but quite honestly, they have to be done strategically. So no topic, including mining or regulatory rules and authorities, can be taken off the table. If not, we will only be successful in targeting little areas with minor successes, but we will not become the resilient, reliable supply chain enforcers that there certainly needs to be. I think the two administrations have a clear understanding of the need to move forward in every area and that no topic can be taken off the table. I've said this many years. The issue of critical minerals resiliency and reliability has nothing to do with either money or technology. It has to do with the will. This is an issue of the will more than it is anything. Are we prepared to make what I call the hard questions with the hard answers, and then develop a path forward in terms of addressing them? Because you and I both know there is no way that you are going to make everyone happy in any kind of a context where mining and extraction of raw materials is a part of the conversation. And it also has to do with huge amounts of environmental impacts, huge amounts of energy consumption, and quite frankly, the ease at which disenfranchised and indigenous communities and people can be marginalized in the conversation. So all issues have to be put on the table, in my view.
I couldn't agree with you more. I'm sort of flabbergasted because I was prepared to argue, but I'm at 100% in agreement with you. And I have one last question.
Of course.
Have the governments of the world where you've been involved, do they understand that one of the key problems in all of this is qualified people to operate the supply chain components? This today in America, in mining and processing, is the number one issue, the lack of qualified people.
So one of the things that was not a part of the original strategy that I shepherded in 2019, we added a expanded section talking about the need for qualified workers in this space. And that is, again, it's from a supply chain perspective. I try to discourage people, don't make this about critical minerals, make it about supply chain resiliency. Because when you do that, you force people into a broader conversation that a lot of people are hesitant in which to engage. And that's part of the problem, is they just won't engage in those sensitive, delicate issues that have to be put on the table, but there has to be a resolution to them.
You know, and finally, I'd just like to make a statement because this has been extremely interesting and enlightening. When people talk to me about this, I say, well, let's put the cards on the table. 25 years ago, the Chinese decided it was important for them, for example, to have secure supplies of rare earth because they could see industries are building where they need this. And they were luckily endowed with a substantial deposit of these materials. Okay, now it's 25 years later, and I estimate they probably have got 1 million man years of experience, 1 million man years. We think there's probably 100,000 employees in the total rare earth space in China today, which means 100,000 man years each year added. And how does the government plan to overcome this in a short time? We don't have we don't have 100. In fact, in the rare earth space today in the United States, I doubt there's 1,000 people. So we're going to have 1,000 man years of experience next year. The Chinese are beating us by 100 times. In my opinion, we underestimate them dramatically. They're not stupid. They're not peasants. These are very serious people. They have more university departments dedicated to rare earths than we have people in IT who can spill rare earths. Okay, now what are we going? Is anybody in Washington thinking about education about promoting this specialty critical mineral supply chains?
Well, I would say of course the simple answer is yes, but there's yes with context behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yes, there is a clear understanding of, and again, the issue, and I've said this many times, the issue can't be an anti-China conversation. What it is
Right.
a supply chain, but also good business practices going forward. And so I believe the kinds of public and private sector relationships that have been established, and quite frankly, the United States and Canada are setting a brand new precedent for how to work with the private sector, but also the role of the public sector to motivate and to support and to incentivize these, frankly, brand new virgin supply chains in many areas. The truth of the matter is that we are seeing significant strides across a number of critical minerals, including rare earths. Can we say that we're going to get to where China's at in the next 5 years? Some people that may wish that, but I think that's unreasonable. What I say to people is, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Take intentional strategic bites of the puzzle and push them forward. Take strategic decisions where you have the government providing incentives, but also working with industry to create a manufacturing and supply chain environment that can be healthy and still function at the highest level of ESGs possible. My question has always been, and this is one that we don't have an answer with yet. This was a question that, frankly, under the Trump administration was one that was out there. Previous Secretary of Commerce, Secretary Wilbur Ross asked this question, and it's one that it doesn't haunt me. It just basically stays with me, which is, when will the Western world make a decision that it's prepared to pay a premium for any kind of critical mineral that is produced at a level where the highest level of ESG standards are reflected? Because that's going to cost you. When will the Western world make a decision? We are prepared to pay a premium to make sure that these supply chains, which are more reliable, they're more resilient, and frankly, do not have the vulnerabilities that currently exist, but there's a price to be paid for that. When will that occur? That's the transition, I think, is the next thing that we'll have to see happen in this space.
Listen, thank you very much for this very informative discussion. And I have to say that I rarely talk to people who know what they're talking about in such depth as you. And of course, I agree with everything you've said, so that makes me even happier. Look, thank you very much, Gary. And we're going to be coming back to you for advice on what's going on in this sector. So thanks again.
I would consider it an honor to do so. Thank you for speaking with me today.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Take good care. Bye now.